The thousands of fans who screamed Elvis Presley's name that autumn night had looked just a few feet beyond the flashing lights, they would have seen the moment that truly changed his life. It was not another sold-out concert. It was not another standing ovation. It was not another #1 song. It was a little girl, sitting alone beside a dark Memphis road, crying so quietly that the whole world managed to ignore her. 1 year later, every room inside Graceland would fall into complete silence because of that same little girl. And not a single person standing there would be able to hold back their tears. The cold autumn wind swept through the streets of Memphis, carrying golden leaves across the empty sidewalks. The city was finally beginning to sleep after another unforgettable night. Neon lights shimmered across rain-soaked pavement, while distant blues music floated through the air like a forgotten memory. Inside a black Cadillac, Elvis Presley rested both hands on the steering wheel, his face illuminated only by passing streetlights. The world believed he was living the perfect life. Millions adored him. Every concert sold out. Every photograph made headlines. Every smile became tomorrow's newspaper. Yet fame had a strange way of becoming painfully quiet whenever the crowds disappeared. Beside him sat Priscilla Presley, watching him instead of the road. She had learned something about Elvis that very few people ever noticed. Whenever he became unusually quiet, his heart was carrying something words could not explain. "You've hardly spoken since we left," she said gently. Elvis smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "I've been thinking." "About what?" He remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Sometimes I wonder," he exhaled slowly, "how it's possible to be surrounded by millions of people and still feel like someone out there needs you more than they do." Priscilla reached across the seat and gently held his hand. "You can't save everyone." Elvis looked at her for only a moment. "No." His voice became almost a whisper. "But maybe we're only expected to save the one person God places in front of us." Neither of them knew those words were about to become real. The Cadillac continued through the quiet streets. Rain began falling again. Tiny drops tapped gently against the windshield, while the wipers moved back and forth with calm precision. Then, Elvis suddenly leaned forward. His expression changed instantly. "Wait." Priscilla looked up. "What is it?" Elvis did not answer. Instead, he slowed the car. Near an old street lamp, barely visible through the rain, a tiny figure sat curled against the sidewalk. She wasn't moving. For a terrifying moment, Elvis thought she might be hurt. Without another word, he pulled the Cadillac to the side of the road. Before Priscilla could even unfasten her seatbelt, Elvis was already outside. Cold rain soaked his hair within seconds. Cars rushed past. Their headlights briefly illuminated the child before disappearing again into the darkness. Drivers glanced. No one stopped. Pedestrians hurried home beneath umbrellas. No one asked why a little girl was sitting alone in the cold. No one even slowed down. It was as though the city had decided she had become invisible. Elvis walked toward her, each step slower than the last. As he came closer, he finally saw her clearly. She looked no older than 6. Her brown hair was damp from the rain. A faded blue dress clung to her tiny frame. Her white sweater was too thin to keep out the cold. Her knees were scratched. Mud covered her small shoes. In her trembling arms, she clutched an old stuffed teddy bear, whose stitching had begun to come apart. She held it the way frightened children hold the only thing that still feels safe. Elvis stopped only a few feet away. The little girl never looked up. Her tears fell silently onto the worn teddy bear. He slowly lowered himself onto one knee until his eyes were level with hers. His voice was softer than it had ever sounded through any microphone. "Hey there, sweetheart." The little girl flinched. She slowly lifted her face. Two frightened green eyes met his. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, she whispered, "You're Elvis Presley." He smiled gently. "I am." A tiny, heartbreaking smile appeared through her tears. "My daddy plays your records every Sunday." Something inside Elvis's chest tightened. He had heard thousands of compliments throughout his career. None had ever sounded as precious as those simple words. He looked around once more. The streets remained empty. Still no one searching. Still no frantic parents.
Only cold wind, only rain, only silence.
"What are you doing out here all by yourself?"
The little girl's lower lip trembled.
"My name is Emily."
"That's a beautiful name." She nodded faintly, then her eyes filled again.
"I can't find my mummy."
The words were barely audible.
"I can't find my daddy either."
Priscilla had quietly joined them. The moment she heard those words, she knelt beside Emily and gently wrapped an arm around her tiny shoulders.
"It's okay, sweetheart."
Emily immediately shook her head.
"No."
Her breathing became uneven.
"It's not okay."
Fresh tears streamed down her face.
"I've been looking everywhere. I keep walking. I keep asking people. But nobody stops."
She looked down at the soaked teddy bear.
"I think..."
Her tiny voice broke completely.
"I think everybody forgot about me."
Those words struck Elvis harder than any criticism, louder than any screaming crowd, deeper than any song he had ever sung. Forgotten. A 6-year-old little girl truly believed the world had forgotten she existed. He swallowed the lump forming in his throat. Without hesitation, he removed his expensive jacket and gently wrapped it around Emily's shoulders. The oversized jacket almost reached her ankles. She looked up at him. "But then you'll be cold." Elvis smiled warmly. "I've stood under much colder rain than this." Emily held the jacket tightly. For the first time since he had arrived, she stopped shivering. Elvis carefully noticed every detail. Her tiny hands were freezing, her cheeks were pale, her shoes were soaked through. Her stomach growled so quietly that almost no one else would have heard it. Almost no one. But Elvis did. "When was the last time you ate?" Emily looked embarrassed. "I don't remember." Priscilla's eyes immediately filled with tears. Elvis slowly closed his eyes for a brief moment. How long had she been wandering these streets? How many people had walked past her? How many had convinced themselves someone else would help? When he opened his eyes again, his decision had already been made. He gently extended his little finger toward Emily. She looked at him with confusion. "My mother taught me something when I was about your age." Emily blinked. "A pinky promise lasts forever." She hesitated only a second before wrapping her tiny finger around his. Her hand was ice cold. Elvis smiled. "I promise you something." Emily stared into his eyes. "You are not spending another minute alone." The little girl searched his face as though trying to decide whether promises from adults were real. Finally, she whispered one trembling word.
Really? Elvis tightened his tiny pinky around hers. Really. Then he stood, looked toward Priscilla, and quietly spoke the words that neither of them would ever forget. We're taking her home. Neither Elvis nor Priscilla realized that those 4 simple words would forever change not only Emily's life, but their own. Because sometimes destiny does not knock on the front door. Sometimes it waits beside a lonely road, holding a worn teddy bear, praying that one kind heart will finally stop. The massive iron gates of Graceland slowly opened. Emily had never seen a house so large. Her tiny green eyes widened as warm golden lights poured through the mansion's windows, making it look less like a home and more like something from a fairy tale. She tightened her grip on the worn teddy bear. Then she looked up at Elvis. Do you really live here? Elvis smiled. I do. Emily stared at the mansion for several seconds before quietly whispering, It must never feel lonely. Those innocent words froze Elvis where he stood. Priscilla noticed the expression on his face immediately. Emily had no way of knowing she had unknowingly spoken about the one feeling that had quietly lived inside those walls for years. Graceland was filled with beautiful rooms, priceless furniture, gold records, awards, photographs, luxury. Yet every evening, when the lights were turned off, the house became painfully quiet. Too quiet. Elvis gently placed his hand on Emily's shoulder. Come on. You must be freezing. As they stepped inside, Emily stopped in the grand entrance hall. Her eyes wandered across the marble floor, the elegant staircase, and the countless framed memories decorating the walls. It looks like a castle, she whispered. Priscilla smiled. Then tonight, you're our little princess. For the first time since Elvis had found her, Emily laughed. It was a tiny laugh, soft, almost shy. But somehow, that single laugh echoed through Graceland, louder than any concert Elvis had ever performed. Even the house itself seemed different, warmer, more alive. Priscilla led Emily upstairs and prepared a warm bath. The little girl hesitated before stepping into the water. I've never had bubbles before, she said with quiet amazement. Priscilla smiled as tears quietly gathered in her eyes. No child should have to be surprised by something so simple. While Emily bathed, Elvis walked into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, then another cabinet, then another. He suddenly realized something. There was plenty of expensive food, but almost nothing a little child would enjoy. He laughed softly to himself. What does a 6-year-old even eat? The housekeeper smiled. Probably whatever is made with love. Within minutes, the kitchen became unexpectedly lively. Elvis insisted on making grilled cheese sandwiches himself. He burned the first one. The second one fell apart. The third looked terrible. Priscilla walked in just in time to see him staring at the pan with complete frustration. She crossed her arms. The king of rock and roll has been defeated by a sandwich. Elvis burst into laughter. I think the sandwich is winning. Moments later, Emily appeared wearing clean pajamas that belonged to one of Priscilla's young relatives. Her damp brown hair rested neatly on her shoulders. She looked like a completely different little girl. She cautiously climbed into her chair. Elvis placed the least burned sandwich in front of her. I made it myself. Emily looked at it seriously, then took a bite. She chewed slowly. Elvis waited nervously, So, what do you think? Emily smiled. It's the best sandwich I've ever had. Priscilla laughed. She's being very kind. Emily shook her head. No. She looked directly at Elvis. It tastes like someone cared. Those words settled over the table like a gentle silence. Nobody spoke for several moments, because everyone knew she wasn't talking about the sandwich. After dinner, Elvis disappeared for a few minutes. When he returned, he was carrying an acoustic guitar. Emily's eyes sparkled. You really play that? Elvis sat beside her. What do you think? She giggled. I think everybody knows. He strummed a soft melody. Nothing loud, nothing meant for stadiums. Just a quiet tune meant for one little girl. Emily listened without blinking. When the song ended, she clapped as enthusiastically as if she were sitting in the front row of one of his concerts. Can I try? Elvis carefully placed the guitar across her lap. It starts with holding it. Her tiny fingers awkwardly touched the strings. The note that came out sounded completely wrong. Emily covered her face. I ruined it. Elvis gently shook his head. No, he smiled. You just played your very first note. And every beautiful song begins with one. Emily looked at him with wide eyes. You really believe that? I do. And I think one day you'll remember this moment. She smiled so brightly that even the servants watching quietly from the hallway couldn't help smiling back. Later that evening, Priscilla tucked Emily into one of the guest bedrooms. The room overlooked the gardens of Graceland. Moonlight spilled softly across the blankets. Priscilla sat beside the bed with a storybook in her hands. Emily listened carefully until her eyelids began growing heavy. Just before falling asleep, she whispered, Mrs. Presley? Priscilla leaned closer. Yes, sweetheart. Emily hesitated, then quietly asked, Could you leave the door open? Of course. I'm scared I'll wake up. She swallowed hard. And find out today was only a dream. Priscilla gently brushed a strand of hair away from Emily's face. This isn't a dream. We're right here. Emily slowly closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Priscilla remained beside the bed a little longer, watching her breathe peacefully. She quietly walked into the hallway where Elvis was waiting. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally, Elvis looked back toward the bedroom. I've never seen this house feel so alive. Priscilla nodded. Neither have I. They walked downstairs together. The laughter that had filled Graceland only hours earlier had faded into peaceful silence. But this silence felt different. It no longer felt empty. It felt complete. The next morning, sunlight poured through the mansion's windows. Emily ran barefoot through the hallways, laughing as Elvis chased her with exaggerated, playful steps. She hid behind a grand piano. He pretended not to see her. I wonder where Emily went. A tiny giggle escaped from behind the piano. I guess she disappeared. Emily jumped out with a joyful shout. I'm here! Elvis laughed so hard that tears filled his eyes. The servants had worked at Graceland for years. Some had seen presidents visit. Some had seen movie stars. Some had witnessed history. Yet none of them had ever seen Elvis smile quite like this. For those 2 short days, Graceland stopped feeling like the home of the world's biggest star. It became something far more precious. It became a family. Neither Elvis nor Priscilla wanted to admit it aloud, but deep inside their hearts, a quiet fear had already begun to grow. Because somewhere beyond those walls, a mother and father were still searching for their little girl. And they both knew. The moment Emily's real family arrived, Graceland would become quiet once again. On the morning of the third day, Graceland woke to a silence that felt different. The laughter that had filled every hallway the day before was gone. Even Emily seemed quieter. She sat on the front steps, gently hugging her old teddy bear, while watching the long driveway disappear beyond the iron gates. Elvis walked over carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to Emily. She smiled politely. "Thank you." He sat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily looked up at him. "Do you think they're still looking for me?" Elvis smiled with quiet certainty. "I know they are." She lowered her eyes. "I hope they didn't stop." "They never would." "How do you know?" Elvis looked toward the distant trees. "Because if you were my little girl," his voice almost disappeared, "I would search forever." Emily slowly rested her head against his shoulder. "I wish every daddy loved like that." Those words lingered in the cool morning air. Before Elvis could answer, the peaceful silence was interrupted by the distant sound of tires racing across the gravel driveway. A police car. Another car followed closely behind it, then another. Emily stood up immediately. Her tiny heart began pounding. The vehicles stopped in front of Graceland. Before anyone even opened a door, a woman rushed out, tears already streaming down her face. "Emily!" The little girl froze. For one brief second, she simply stared. Then recognition filled her eyes. "Mommy!" She dropped the teddy bear and ran. Her mother met her halfway. The impact of their embrace nearly knocked them both to the ground. Neither of them cared. They simply held each other as though letting go would be impossible. Emily's father reached them only moments later. His face was exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were red from days without sleep. The strong man who had spent 2 days searching every street in Memphis fell to his knees and wrapped both arms around his daughter. He could not speak. He simply cried. The police officers quietly stepped back. Even they struggled to hold back their emotions. Priscilla covered her mouth with both hands. Elvis stood perfectly still, watching, smiling, and quietly wiping away a tear before anyone noticed. After several minutes, Emily's father slowly walked toward Elvis. He stopped only a few feet away. His voice trembled. "I don't know how to thank you." Elvis shook his head. "You already have." The man looked confused. "You found your daughter." "That's enough." Emily's mother stepped forward. "We saw the television announcement this morning." She wiped away fresh tears. "When they told us Elvis Presley had been protecting our little girl," she could not finish the sentence. Instead, she simply embraced Priscilla. Neither woman spoke. Sometimes gratitude is too large for words. Later that afternoon, it was finally time for Emily to leave. The same driveway that had welcomed her with hope now waited to carry her away. She stood beside the open car door. Her small suitcase rested at her feet. The old teddy bear was tucked beneath one arm. She looked toward Graceland one last time. "It feels like I'm leaving home again." Those words broke something inside Elvis. He slowly knelt in front of her. From his pocket, He pulled out a tiny silver guitar charm attached to a delicate chain. "I wanted you to have this." Emily's eyes grew wide. "So you'll always remember." He gently fastened the necklace around her neck. "That no matter where life takes you, you'll always have music." Emily looked down at the little guitar. Then she threw both arms around Elvis's neck. She held him tightly as a 6-year-old possibly could. "I'll never forget you." Elvis closed his eyes. "Neither will I." She stepped back and looked at Priscilla. Without hesitation, she hugged her too. "You read stories better than my mommy." Everyone laughed through their tears. Emily's mother smiled. "I can't even argue with that." Then came the hardest moment. Emily climbed into the car. The door slowly closed. The engine started. As the car began rolling toward the gates, Emily rolled down the window and waved with all her strength. Elvis and Priscilla kept waving long after the car had disappeared beyond the trees. Only when the driveway became completely empty did they finally lower their hands. The silence returned, but this time it hurt. That evening, Priscilla quietly walked through one of the guest rooms. Everything had been cleaned. Everything except one small thing. Lying beside the pillow was Emily's favorite rag doll. Priscilla picked it up. She smiled. Then the tears came. Elvis entered the room a few moments later. Without saying a word, he understood. He gently sat beside her. For several minutes, they simply looked at the little doll. Finally, Elvis whispered, "I didn't know 2 days could change a person's heart." Priscilla leaned against him. "They didn't. She did." That night, they talked for hours. Not about concerts, not about fame, not about money. They talked about family, about children, about the strange feeling that Graceland had never truly felt like a home until a little girl had filled it with laughter. Before the sun rose, they made a promise to each other. One day, their home would hear that laughter again. Months passed. Emily's family became regular visitors to Graceland. Every visit felt like a reunion. Every goodbye remained difficult. The bond between the two families grew stronger with every passing season. Then, almost 1 year after that unforgettable autumn night, everything changed. Elvis stood inside a hospital room, unable to speak. A nurse carefully placed his newborn daughter into his trembling arms. The world outside still knew him as the king of rock and roll, but in that moment, he was simply a father. Tears rolled freely down his face. Priscilla smiled through her own tears as she watched him gently cradle their baby. Just then, there was a soft knock at the hospital door. It opened. Emily walked inside, holding the same old teddy bear Elvis had wrapped in his jacket one rainy night. She had grown a little taller, but her smile was exactly the same. She walked slowly toward the baby's crib. Without saying a word, she placed the teddy bear beside the newborn. The room became completely silent. Then Emily looked at Elvis. Her voice was gentle. 1 year ago, she smiled through tears. You gave me a home when I thought I had lost mine. She looked down at the sleeping baby. And today, she carefully touched the edge of the blanket.
God gave your home the little miracle it was waiting for.
No one moved. No one spoke. Elvis lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. For the first time in years, tears fell without restraint. Priscilla wrapped one arm around Emily and kissed the top of her head. In that quiet hospital room, they all understood something that words could never fully explain. Family is not created only by blood. Sometimes it is created by compassion, by kindness, by stopping when everyone else keeps walking. Years later, visitors touring Graceland would admire the gold records, the famous stage costumes, and the countless awards displayed throughout the mansion. But those who truly knew Elvis always remembered a different treasure. A tiny silver guitar charm, an old, worn teddy bear, and the little girl whose tears had quietly transformed one of the most famous homes in America into a place where love mattered far more than fame. Because sometimes
The greatest miracle in a person's life does not arrive beneath bright stage lights. Sometimes it is waiting beside a lonely road, in the eyes of a child, hoping that one compassionate heart will choose to stop.